Welcome to the Real Estate for the Culture podcast, where we investigate trends and educate listeners on all things urban real estate in Chicago and nationwide. Let's get started. Welcome to the Real Estate for the Culture podcast. I am Lauren Lowry. I am the CEO of FP Commercial Real Estate, and we also do development strategy and market strategies, and you name it in real estate, we do it. Okay. And one of the highlights from this podcast is being able to talk to some of Chicago's most accomplished developers and other strategists, and talk to them a little bit about their experiences, about how they see the future of Chicago real estate or urban real estate generally, how they see what's happened, how they see that impacting the future. Today's guest is Roger Romanelli. He is the executive director of the Fulton Market Association. Roger, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Lauren, it's great to be here. How's everything?
Everything is great now that you are here on the pod.
Thank you.
Roger, we're not going to go into the fact that we've known each other a long time, but what I do know about you is that the minute I saw you as a professional adult, you were advocating for something in City Hall. It appears that you're always sort of thinking about helping others in some capacity. How did that start? How did you sort of get into sort of this mindset that you were looking to advocate for others? So that's how I see it. How do you see it?
Well, really appreciate you being on the show and appreciate the question. When I was at Northwestern, right, and I did my undergrad in urban studies, the professor said, get out in the field, get out in Chicago, go take a look at housing, take a look at economic development, take a look at some of our different urban cultures that are having challenges like the Native American community in Chicago. So we went into different neighborhoods while I was up in school in Evanston. We went into different neighborhoods and looked at these various public policy issues. And that really sparked an interest. But what really sparked an interest in my heart was at the time at Northwestern, we were talking about ending apartheid in South Africa. I was reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And as I took the train, CTA train from Evanston all the way to Oak Park, I went past the Henry Horner homes at Lake and Damon. And I felt in my heart that America had a lot of work to do to fix its past. So I felt with the combination of all the factors, but primarily motivated by the fact that America had some economic development makeup work to do, if you will. I really wanted to dedicate myself to Chicago and to try to uplift communities that were at economic disadvantage. So I've had the opportunity to work in neighborhoods that have had low income, and I've had the opportunity to work in Fulton Market, higher income. And I just believe that we can share those success stories with all communities, especially those that really need more investment, more economic boost.
Well, thank you. That's a great answer to that. I learned a lot about you just from that discussion that I didn't already know. But we're going to start quickly with some quick fire questions just to get to know you a little bit better. We learned a lot about you just now in the last 3 minutes, but some quick fire questions. Number one, what is your favorite Chicago neighborhood?
My favorite Chicago neighborhood, well, it's got to be Fulton Market because I've been there now for 27 years.
Wow.
And I utilized my previous urban planning, which was about 14 years in urban planning, and tried to apply those lessons learned to Fulton Market. So when I take a look at how the market has transformed, when I got there in late 1999 to today, February of 2026, it is my favorite neighborhood because we can see the fruition of urban planning. And if there was ever a case to be made for strong urban planning, Fulton Market makes that case. So Fulton Market is my number one favorite. But my second favorite community is, without question, Garfield Park on the west side. I just think that the boulevards there are beautiful. I think the park is amazing. It's centrally located. My mother went to high school at Providence, so that neighborhood that was where my family grew up around that neighborhood. And so as part of our Fulton Market work, we've been called out to Garfield Park to do some economic development. So I've made contacts with businesses and a lot of residents out there. So while Fulton Market is my number one neighborhood, my sister neighborhood and in my heart is Garfield Park, and trying to extrapolate the lessons we've learned in Fulton Market further down the west side.
Got it. Okay. Those are two great neighborhoods. That's awesome. What is your favorite West Loop restaurant?
My favorite West Loop restaurant. Come on, Lauren. I'm the director of the Fulton Market Association. I can't identify one.
Okay, give me top three. Give me top three. There's some great restaurants there.
There's some phenomenal restaurants there. Well, Fomento's is phenomenal. Fomento's is a phenomenal Italian restaurant right there on Randolph Street and Sangamon. And they also have a Nona's sandwich shop. So if you don't want to go for a full Italian restaurant at Fomento's, you go right around the corner to Nona's and you get some nice Italian sandwiches over there. The owners of that place, Fomento's and Nona's, have been very dedicated to neighborhood economic development. And during COVID, they were part of our Chicago Restaurant Coalition to get restaurants indoor dining. Then I got to go to Wishbone Restaurant, which has been part of Fulton Market now, a little bit on the part of the downtown there. But Joel over there at Wishbone is really one of the great pioneers of the West Side together with Oprah. They really built up the West Loop. And then number 3 is one of our recent restaurants in Fulton Market, a place called Machacita, which is located at 1017 West Lake. And she sells smoothies and avocado toast. It's a real health-driven place and family-owned. And so it's a great place to hang out. And so you got Italian, you've got your Southern cooking there at Wishbone, and then you got your new smoothies over at Machacita. But I've been working with restaurants, and you have too, now for many, many years in the city. And I salute all of these restaurants. To me, it's a magic trick that they stay open, that they pay that they're able to pay all their employees. They provide this quality food on demand. So I salute all our restaurants across our city.
I mean, clearly, I think early in its sort of transformation, the West Loop was Restaurant Row, and that was really bringing the engine besides Oprah Studios. That was really the engine that brought a lot of people there, from Marche to Vivo. Did a little bit of research. Vivo opened in 1991. I think Marche in 1994, or 7. I feel like, and again, when I think back, I thought I went to the Marche opening and remember thinking, who's coming over here? Like, it's like a ghost town. Like, why are people coming over here? And of course, it was huge. It was big. Red Light was my favorite restaurant in the entire city, which was also on Green and Randolph. And when they closed, I literally cried. Like, I was sad. I think about it today. It's been closed for certainly over a decade, my assumption is. And I mean, it makes me sad. But now, you've got 30 more restaurants that have, sort of really transformed that corridor into something that's phenomenal. So when did you talk to me quickly as we sort of transform into how you arrived at the Fulton Market Association? Give me your sort of economic development origin story. You started with whom and then somehow found yourself at Fulton Market. Give us that trajectory.
Right. 1 year after Northwestern, I did a separate job, worked for a political polling firm the first year out of college. But then a year after that, I connected with the Lawrence Avenue Development Corporation up in Albany Park at Lawrence and Kedzie, around that intersection, going east and west on Lawrence Avenue, east to the river, and then west to roughly Pulaski. And so we worked in that. I was hired for the Lawrence Avenue Development Corporation as an economic development planner. And so our job was to walk up and down the streets of Lawrence Avenue and Kedzie Avenue, talking to small businesses, property owners, talking to residents about how we could economically revitalize the community. And one of my key jobs was on Monday mornings, I would get there to work and then I would walk around the neighborhood. I might have had a bike at the time, but I wasn't driving. And then I would look for gang billboards in that neighborhood. And then we'd pay a local handyman to go get on ladders and paint off gang billboards. This was before the city's graffiti blaster. So for 3 years, I was in Albany Park. We did a lot of economic development, public safety, small business assistance. So 3 years in Albany Park. And then for a year, I was the director of the Andersonville Chamber of Commerce. But my heart was in transferring from retail economic development over to the industrial side of economic development. So
Hmm.
after a year in Andersonville, I got a call that there was an opening at the 18th Street Development Corporation down in Pilsen, and then I could transfer over to the industrial economic development side of things. I was there for 3.5 years, and then I went to the Industrial Council of Near West Chicago for a year and a half, and then the folks in Fulton Market said, "Come on over." And I went over to Fulton Market in, like I say, October of 1999, and I've been there ever since. So I had the advantage of, again, working in Albany Park, which was a lower income community at the time, and they had some crime problems and some gang challenges. And then I went over to Andersonville, which is a little bit more upscale. So I was able to see the both sides of the real retail spectrum in the low and the middle income areas. Then down to Pilsen, which of course has a lot of has both, has the gentrification and the low income. So I was able to see what was happening with the retail there and the industrial, because they have a big industrial corridor. And then in Fulton Market, eventually we had both. We had industrial and retail. So, it was helpful for me to have the retail and industrial backgrounds. When I got to the market, I could talk about both sides of both sectors there. So that was, these groups are community-based nonprofit groups. They're 501c6s or 501c3s. They all have nonprofit charters. I think there are still about 40 or 50 local community-based groups throughout our city of Chicago. And so, a lot of people are doing hard work in different neighborhoods. It'd be nice if we still had a citywide coalition. We used to have that coalition in the late 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s for about 15 years, but that has since dissipated.
The
So
wonderful Can Do organization, correct?
that's right, can do. But that's how I got to Fulton Market. I went from neighborhood group to neighborhood group, learned some things, and then was able to, convince some folks that I had more experience so that I could handle a more complex job.
I mentioned to you in our prep call that, when I arrived in the West Loop, the only thing I remember really early on about the West Loop, and so maybe this was 1988, 89, maybe still in college, and my father driving me down Halsted to Randolph. And I remember that discussion with my father because I didn't spend a lot of time with my family. Adults were the enemy to me. So I never spent a lot of time with my father. But I remember him talking to me as we went by the Bloomer's Chocolate Factory. He told me when he first came to Chicago, he was over at the Western Union over there. He smelled the chocolate, did not have $1. And it was the worst day of his life. Like he felt like he didn't have anything. So I remember the discussions around sort of West Loop. And I remember going down and seeing Madison and Halsted Street. Madison Halsted was Skid Row. There was nothing happening there. It was very dark. It was very dusty. There were people sort of sitting on the streets. It was a mess. By the time I arrived there again, probably 1991, 92, sometime after school, I was bringing people to the new management's loft buildings that were in that area. And then the subsequent development that happened over time that started to build up the West Loop. In 1999, how did you see it? What was happening in 1999?
Well, I will tell you, but I do want to reference a little bit back before 1999, if you'll let me, which is that in this Chicago neighborhood, as in other Chicago neighborhoods, a great history of neighborhoods in our city and in other cities around our nation, is that you had a neighborhood like the West Loop. Madison Street was Skid Row, where a lot of the people who had alcohol problems would go there. And I guess they were able to get some wine from time to time, but they also that was the place where they slept on the streets in the doorways. And if they were at an alcohol problem, they literally were brought to Madison Street, and that's where they slept. So wow. in the early 70s, that's when Father Ignatius McDermott from Haymarket Center went and started to minister to those people and said, "Come in from the streets. We'll give you some soup. We'll give you a place to live. We'll help you rehabilitate." And so when Haymarket and the city officials started to, if you will, rehabilitate Madison Street, that's when the condo conversion and the residential conversion started to flow in the West Loop. And then with some of those West Loop residents there, they were able to be customers for the restaurants on Randolph Street, like Red Light, Marche, and the other folks. So That's where some of those retailers were able to get grounded because they had local residents in the neighborhood. So when I got there in 1999, Randolph Street still had I would say about 20 different mostly wholesale produce on Randolph. Then the meat packers were mostly on Fulton Street. And then there was a sprinkling of both produce and meat folks on Lake Street. So and then you had the bigger players on Carroll that had trailers coming over the road. Those were mostly meat packers and distributors. So when I got down there in '99, I would say 60% of the community was still wholesale and manufacturing, maybe 70%. And then you had the restaurants and some art galleries and retailers. And so I could still get a sense in 1999 that what the market really was, I mean, incredible American history, family-owned food distribution companies. And everyone in Chicago and the suburbs used to buy their produce on Randolph Street and buy a lot of their meat and fish products in Fulton Market. And you could, again, really tell that it was family-owned businesses before some of the Cisco's came on and the United Food Service and, some of the bigger players. So that was great. In 1999, we got there. We still had the grid of the street. At the time, the Fulton Market merchants wanted more industrial zoning protection so that they saw the condo market moving to the north, and they didn't want to be overrun by the condo developers. So they were pushing for more stringent zoning down there in the market. They didn't get it. They were pushing for the PMD, but they didn't. That only stopped north at Carroll. And then the market got C zoning, which prohibited first floor residential, but still allowed the growth of retail and commercial. And so that was the snapshot in '99. You had vibrant food manufacturers and processors. And not only was the condo threat on the horizon to the businesses, and I'll simply explain that if I can. You mind if I just explain
Sure.
it? You had produce companies starting their day at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So and the meat companies as well. A lot of the meat packers would get their trailers parking in the market like around 1 or 2 in the morning, sort of jockeying to see who would get in the docks at 6 or 7 in the morning. But they'd have to run the refrigeration trucks to keep the meat products cold. Well, the residents didn't like that, and they started throwing bags of water on the semis and calling the cops and complaining about forklifts. So the folks saw that when there were a couple of condos coming into the area and apartments, they were having some conflicts. Now, on Randolph Street, not only did they have conflicts with some of the condos, but there was a local community group that produced the Taste of Randolph. And the first year they did that, they didn't inform the produce companies that they were going to do it.
Wow. So what year was that? What year you said? Is that 1999 or is that earlier year?
1996.
1996.
Right after the planters were put in on Randolph Street in 96 for the Democratic National Convention. The first Taste of Randolph was in June of 96, and they didn't inform the local produce companies. It might have been 97. I think it was 96. 96, 97.
So the Taste of Randolph, I'm just going to say, the Taste of Randolph was created by a residents organization.
Correct.
So the residents there decided to do that. And by that time, they're so empowered that they're not even talking to their neighbors who had been there 100 years to say, this is what we're going to do.
That's right. And not only was it the residents, but the residents group was organized by some residential real estate interests that they wanted to conquer Fulton Market. So they wanted to put the pressure on the meat wholesalers and the fruit and vegetable wholesalers. Tell them, hey, we don't know if we want you to stay here much longer. So that was the Taste of Randolph. That was part of the Taste of Randolph inception, was we're going to send a signal to these guys on Randolph that the condo owners south of Randolph now are going to control Randolph Street. And the wholesalers that have been on Randolph for a long time, your days are numbered. That was what I walked into basically in 1999.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so, and of course in 1999, they're like, how are we going to stop this? What are we going to do? But then it starts to transition a little bit to maybe we can, make money if we sell our properties. So what was the transition? What happened where it says, if we can't beat them because they're taking over everything? Or was that still the case? Was there a fight, or they just think, did everyone leave? Because right now you're saying, but there's one manufacturer of meats in the West Loop right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
but
mean,
Lauren, seriously. So just imagine 1999, and then how do you build the bridge to today?
right.
And the real victory in Fulton Market was in our early battle in 1999, 2000, 2001 to set the course of the community for the future, being the Fulton Market Association mobilized for the first time, got our 501c3, and we talked to the other residential group. We said, listen, the condo boom is naturally happening in the West Loop area. Let's continue to build up the West Loop community as a residential community. Let's improve the parks over there. Let's improve the schools over there. Now, north of Randolph, in what was and is Fulton Market, we said, let's have the residential market grow a little slower here. It's okay if you get a building where maybe you put 2 or 3 units above the first floor, but let's not have 100-unit residential developments north of Randolph so these companies can stay in this area. And so what happened there is even more investment flowed into the West Loop. You saw larger developments, which were great because some of those buildings needed to be torn down and redeveloped. Great. So you had some really nice residential come in south of Randolph. North of Randolph, we continue to have the food companies, but then retailers come in, the restaurants. Then we had some residential come in, right? And so what happened was the market, the residential market flowed south of Randolph, and that energy flowed south of Randolph. It was great. And then the business energy and smaller residential flowed north of Randolph. Now, then you come up now to the year 2012. Why is that historic? Because when we got there, we said this community needs to rebuild its CTA station, which was shut down in the Fulton Market in 1996 or 1995, I think, when they redid the Green Line. Of all the things they did, they closed the Halstead and Lake station in Fulton Market. Shut it down overnight, shut it down. So we all said, look, for the future of this community, we've got to restore our CTA access. So from the year 2000 to 2008, we rallied for 8 years, say, build that L station and build it at Morgan, which was my idea because it was more equidistant between Halstead and Ashland. Let's build it in Morgan. It was also a block away from the cold storage building, which was the biggest building in the community. And sure enough, when the L station opened in 2012, in came Google and they said, we want that big building. The L station has cut our parking requirement in half. Can we please come to the community and get a zoning change? We said, come on in. We're all open arms. We love it. You're a business interest. You're not a high density residential. You're not going to overrun a lot of these family owned distributors. Come on in, Google. They came in the year 2012, and then the community saw resulting corporate boom after that, property values going up, and then the wholesalers were able to really make a profit on their property, which enabled many of them to then double, triple, quadruple their square footage elsewhere in the city, expand, modernize, create even more jobs, and everybody won almost everybody won in Fulton Market. But I'll stop there.
Well, so I mean, I think that's great, and I do want to talk a little bit of policy. I mean, I recognize at a certain point, once these things were happening, then there's a Fulton Market Innovation District. Then there's other policies that are put in place to, bring in more development or to, do whatever.
Yeah.
But so as we talk about the fact that some people lucked out, some people did really well, right? So out of those 20, you've got one left. Maybe 19 of them did a great job, but many of them did not come back and just come to Chicago because, of course, there were other incentives in other cities to do other things too. How many people actually left left the city of Chicago altogether with their businesses or closed their businesses altogether?
Well, again, I think when I got there in 99, I think there were about 60 food companies still there. So I think there were about 60.
60?
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. A bunch of them.
And now there's one.
Well, right. Now there is one left. Yeah, that's right. One food
I think
company. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We can't gloss over that.
Right.
I mean, in the city of Chicago, there are 60 businesses, and within 20 years, They're
27,
all gone.
27 years. There's one left. That's
So
right.
almost 3 decades. So the city of Chicago and other urban corridors can change in the drop of a hat. And I feel like we think, 30 years is very, very fast. And a lot of those things happen really within that 20 years that you arrive. So the last 10 years has just been gravy and other things have been happening. But for almost 20 years, that community transforms so fast. And I think, again, the reason why I wanted to talk to you, because there are good things about that. I think West Loop is the economic engine right now. Chicago is one of the hottest communities in the entire nation. Property values have increased dramatically. Rental rates have increased dramatically. It's a real positive. It's a great story. But at the same time, again, some people lost on that just a little bit. I mean, there's a little history and things like that are lost in that. But who you said that most of the people won on that deal, on this transformation of West Loop? Who would you say lost on that in that situation?
Okay, so on the winner's side and the loser's side, we'll start with the winners. Okay, so the winners were a lot of the food companies that, because they made a case for urban planning, which was, let's keep this as a business district. The city agreed, and then after Google, they were able to sell. A lot of them were able to sell their property for very good amazing profits, maybe 20 times what they originally invested. Then many of them took those funds and either renovated new factories, especially along the I-55 corridor, the Stevenson Expressway corridor, and moved down there. So right now we have about 20 of our former Fulton Market companies up and down I-55, and that was great. And then some of the smaller companies consolidated or moved out or closed. We had a couple companies move out to the suburbs. We had one company move out to the western suburbs. But then several of the Fulton Market companies just moved a little further west into the Kinsey corridor. So right now I think there's 3 or 4 companies, that are still members of ours. They used to be in the market. Now they're in the Kinsey corridor. So again, because we were able to do the right urban planning, those companies were able to wait a little bit longer and get paid and use those profits to, again, open up new factories, renovate, and so forth. But here's who lost in Fulton Market. In 2012, Google came to the community, and we were so excited that we felt that the business interest, people going out for lunch, for example, could learn the way around the community compared to baby buggies moving through the community. We felt folks going out to lunch would be able to navigate the forklifts and the trucks. We thought it was a win-win. However, in 2015, the city of Chicago said, you know what? We love Fulton Market so much that we are going to forcibly landmark 140 properties all along Randolph Street, from Randolph up till basically Carroll, from Halstead back to Racine. So they said, here's our plan. We want to landmark these properties. And, oh, by the way, we're going to take legal right over these 140 properties in, 4 days. 4 days. They took preliminary legal authority over 140 properties in 4 days, meaning we had projects going on where people were renovating their facades, taking the old bricks down, putting up new bricks. City said, whoa, save those old bricks because you got to put them back up.
Wow. Here's an old picture of Randolph Street back in its day, so
beautiful photo. Amazing. But now you see this building, keep that back up. Put that back up real quick, okay? Do you see this is on Randolph Street, right, Laura?
Yep. Uh-huh.
You see the height of these buildings, 1, 2, 3 stories, in some cases 4 stories, right?
Yes.
As part of the landmark district, they said you have to keep this height. You can never, ever, ever go above that height, except for a few special buildings that got built on Randolph that weren't in the landmark district that got to go up to about 12 stories.
Right.
Name names, but in other words, the landmarking policy by the city took away significant land rights and air rights for many properties that we disagreed with, and I still disagree with. I think Randolph Street, just so you know, Lauren, for everybody in Chicago, Randolph Street is the widest street in the whole city. It's wider than Michigan Avenue when you go from curb to curb.
Okay.
So we felt that, again, as an urban planning strategy, that Randolph could accommodate high density developments, higher density, Randolph Street Restaurant Row, build it up, have just the most amazing neighborhood retail you could possibly find. The city said, no, no, no. These buildings from basically Halsted to almost Randolph, on Randolph from Halsted to Racine, most of these buildings got to be clamped down to 3 or 4 stories. So they took away a lot of air rights, and a lot of people were not able to sell their properties and get a windfall. And the same technique was used on Fulton Street. So a lot of Fulton Street property owners were not able to sell their properties for what their neighbors right around the corner. Some folks sold their 15,000 square foot building for $6 million, where the guys around the corner sold their 15,000, 30,000 square foot building for maybe 20 million, 50 million, because those folks were able to go up. So I think the good news in Fulton Market is we did the urban planning right as a business district, and a lot of these food companies were able to sell and grow in the future. The bad side was that government stepped in and said, we're going to dictate street by street how the future economic development is going to flow. Now, I understand the idea on Fulton Street because I've been to, of course, you've been to New Orleans, Bourbon Street. It's beautiful. It's low density. People can hang off balconies. It's a lot of fun. And I like that idea for Fulton Street, but not Randolph Street. So those folks on Fulton and Randolph, they lost real estate rights. It's a real shame. I don't agree with it. And but we're still trying to help them out. So that's another piece of the puzzle. Is landmarking helped save some buildings that had some historic flavor, but at the same time, landmarking came in and clamped down air rights, and we found that to be unfair.
So let's talk about policy. I mean, it becomes a political discussion because, of course, as we're talking now in the West Loop, there's a new development that is taking advantage of some unique zoning designations in that area. And again, we're going to go from properties that had a sort of a development, sort of X5, sort of rating that's now it might go up to a DX 11, where they can build like radically higher high rises. I'm not quite sure how many feet up or how many stories that is, but there's a few things that's happening right now in the West Loop where and in Illinois, I should say too, not just the West Loop, where the governor is talking about doing planning. He's now going to rezone everything in the state. The state is now going to designate what the zoning is. And then we have some issues now in the West Loop where the alderman is going to supersede the planning department and their guidelines. Just by the mark of a pen, an alderman can say, yeah, even though there are no other, 90-story buildings here now, I think that this one is okay right here, and I'll just sign off on it. That could happen anywhere. That's going to start if that moves forward. You're going to start to see that happen and transform again even more what the West Loop could be. But other communities could see that same thing happen, where the alderman can say, "Well, you know what? I like this developer. I like your plan, and I'll allow you to supersede what the zoning rules and regulations are. You may not have to go to Plan Commission to present anything to anyone. Move it forward." What are your thoughts about sort of this thing now that's happening in the West Loop that could completely transform even what you see now?
Right. Well, let me first address the governor. I read about that in the news, that the governor was talking about the state getting involved in local zoning. And as a local zoning urban planner, the state has really no business getting involved in that. None whatsoever. So I would ask the governor to support local economic development and empower local residents and neighborhood groups and local developers and elected officials to handle the zoning. But on the second point, the growth of Fulton Market has been a direct synergy now if you want to start the clock in 1999 when I got there, or started in 2000, it's been a synergy with the planning department and the local aldermen. And they've worked hand in hand. And the city's zoning laws, the city's zoning ordinances don't allow an alderman to supersede the zoning ordinance. So, for example, in the case of the project I think you're talking about, the Department of Planning had a recommendation that the certain building would be kept at a certain height or maybe a certain density. But the planning department and the zoning department give us the multipliers for what is allowed by law. So I don't think the alderman in this case is violating the law or creating his own new law. I think the alderman is just disagreeing with the planning department's recommendation for zoning. Because at the end of the day, it's the local alderman in the city that controls all of the zoning in the ward. Now, whether or not that's a good policy or not, I personally don't think that's a good policy, but that is the state of the policy today. In all 50 wards, every individual alderman controls the zoning. That's it. And they back each other up in the city council zoning committee. So in the case of this project, I think that's been discussed. I don't think the alderman is going beyond the law or creating new rules. I think here they just might have a planning difference of opinion, urban planning difference of opinion with the planning department. But if you look across Fulton Market, we've got very large towers that have been built with synergy between planning and the alderman. So if somebody at planning is saying today, well, slow down, we don't want you to go up to 35 stories. I mean, planning has already let the horse out of the barn big time in Fulton Market, and how they could now constrain a new developer when they've already let other developers go up tall, I think is inconsistent. So again, at the end of the day, what you have here is a set of zoning codes. And like you said, the DX 11 is in play in Fulton Market. And again, the D stands for downtown, X for mixed, which means you could have residential or commercial. In other words, the city of Chicago said, we're going to expand the downtown into Fulton Market. So you can't really blame the developers for wanting downtown larger buildings, and that's what's happening in the market.
Well, I've seen a lot, even in South Loop, where they are sort of downgrading that downtown zoning. And, here we're elevating it. So, I really think it's kind of interesting because, again, if we think about some of our communities that are primarily residential single family homes in our, these neighborhoods, most of Chicago is basically a bunch of neighborhoods with single family homes, 2 flats, 3 flats.
Right.
And, all of a sudden, someone like me says, you know what? I want a 20-story property here. And I'm looking at a property right now where I want a 20-story property. And it's like built already. It already has like 5 stories. I want to build another 20 on top of that, which is what they did in the South Loop and the West Loop for many, many years. They just built on top of the industrial that was there. And if they're allowed to do it someplace else, then, I'm going to be all over, my aldermen and planning. Like, look, Chicago changes. Why stifle me if this continues here? Why is this different than what I want to do? Because I want fantastic views of downtown Chicago looking, sort of north into the city or someplace else. So, again, the key is Chicago changes so rapidly, but some people are able to do that rapidly and reap the benefits of it. Oftentimes in some communities on the south sides and the west sides, people take over things happen with, landmarks and things like that. And people are never really compensated for the things that they've been, sort of working through for the last 50 years on their properties or in their communities. Right. And I feel like the West Loop is a great sort of story and how quickly Chicago can change, our communities can change, but, sort of understanding and working with your political representatives there to make sure that you are a part of that change, that make sure that you benefit from the change. Because again, some people lose in some of these developments, but we can use this as an example of how we can win if you had, a similar strategy or proximity to something or downtown or something like that. So planned progress is important there. Before we sort of move on, I'm not going to keep you too much longer, Roger, but there's a new book that was out there that was talking about sort of the change in Chicago restaurants and just sort of how Chicago's restaurant scene became its scene. It's certainly, one of the more popular restaurant scenes, all of Chicago restaurants in Chicago. All the James Beard Awards take place here. You've got award-winning Michelin-starred restaurants here in Chicago. And there's this great book that talked about sort of how Chicago how the scene became the scene it is. And I think it did sort of really sort of focus a bit on the West Loop. So just a little bit about the West Loop, because it has sort of dramatically changed.
Yeah.
And again, I always love to tell people, and folks realize this generally, but every restaurant begins with a real estate deal. They're not selling out of the food truck there, so they're making like wonderful, unbelievable real estate deals to make this happen, to make these transformations happen.
Right.
So when you arrived in 1999, what do you remember about that restaurant scene? And I'm saying this because I want other people to think about how they could transform a corridor.
Right.
Like what are certain of those things? I mean, right now that area has top of the line, retailers, including apparel, hospitality, Soho House. You've got everything there. But there was a slow progression as I saw it.
Right.
Number one with Oprah Studios, and then number two with that very small restaurant scene that just exploded into like something you've never seen before. What do you remember in 1999 by the time you arrived? What was happening with the restaurant scene there? Certain Fulton was not a restaurant scene, but certainly Randolph was.
Right. And I had seen that development of the restaurant scene earlier in my career, especially in Andersonville, where we had the tale of two Middle Eastern restaurants. We had Beirut Restaurant, one of my favorite Lebanese restaurants of all time. It was really like a family restaurant. That's it. You walked in, you got the best tabbouleh and hummus in Chicago. I still believe it. But down the street, you had Reza's Persian restaurant. You remember Reza?
Reza's, yes.
Now, Reza had the open windows. Reza had beautiful decor. Reza had big portions. So what I saw happening there, and what I think is the story of Randolph Street, Restaurant Row, and now Fulton Market, is that Chicago diners wanted an elevated dining experience. They wanted beautiful environment. They wanted some custom wood. They wanted also to be able to come at night and maybe hang out at the bar and have a little extra nightlife. So it felt like an upscale, almost like you're in a hotel restaurant. They wanted to give a sense of pampering of the customer in a lot of different ways. And Jerry Kleiner did it well with his Red Light and Marché. And so the restaurants had a certain elegance to it that uplifted your experience. Also, you paid a little bit more, but that's okay. People are willing to do that. People want to go out on a nice date, a family event, a birthday party. They're willing to spend a little bit more. So that whole idea of elevating the restaurant experience, that's kind of what Randolph Street was. Elevate the dining experience, Girl and the Goat, and then Alinea and Next, taking it to a whole new level with food technology. And so what I've come to understand, and I've been explained to me by people in the food industry, is that people that go out to Chicago residents, they've really developed a bit more of a advanced palate, and they developed more of a how should I say, more of a expert taste palate, and they want to go and they want to match their food to their drinks and their beverages. You got gastropubs and so forth. So an elevated dining experience, a more educated dining customer, and then that's where the market was able to flourish now with all these different restaurants that really have elevated the dining experience. And now in order to afford that, because that's really not happening way up the South Side, but in order to afford that, that's where a lot of the corporate employees that are in the market can, take their customers out to lunch and have a little higher price point. And then you got some residents in the West Loop, a little bit more disposable income, so they can support those restaurants at a higher price point. So it really is the restaurant matches the market of customers, and you got the business sector and the residential sector that are able to afford a higher price point. So all of that comes together in Fulton Market. And I just hope that what we can do is, as we go out through the rest of the city, is, okay, figure out who the local residents are, figure out who the local businesses are, and match their price point in the middle of having more restaurants in every community, regardless of whether their price point is up or down. But I think that's the history of the Fulton Market, is you had more income flow into the community in terms of businesses and residents. They were able to support more upscale restaurants. And then the word got out citywide and now nationally. And so people come to Fulton Market as tourists for a big dining experience. And they are truly satisfied, but they got to pay a little bit extra.
Well, I always feel like we leave the Oprah Studios out of the conversation in that early transformation of the West Loop because tourists were coming in droves. I mean, she was bringing in people over there, and there was no place for them to eat at a certain point. So, from the Wishbone, even staying later for that elevated experience in the Marche Vivo red light sort of district area, and
Right.
then it started to grow and grow. But you did have that anchor of bringing in people to a scary West Loop studio back in that day when she opened that. It was not a friendly place, honestly, even then. It was changing. I remember 1000 West Washington had a lot of, the condos. It had some great retailers on the first levels there, but it was not like the best, it was still sort of a little shady, a little shaky over there. But tourists kept coming and she became more and more popular. And then by the time 1999 hits, like it's just everything is great now. Everything is happening. All those places are really happening. But you did have that anchor, I believe, of that sort of thing happening. And then everything starts to grow. Then there's more condos. And I always love to share that in 1992 or 3 or something like that. I can't remember these dates. I tried to get these dates in my head before we had this conversation, but I was like, how old am I? I don't even know. So it's like, yeah, but bringing people over to Newmarket, to the new management lofts. I think on Peoria, Sangamon, and Morgan, they had those over there just close to right off of Lake Street.
Right.
And the people over there were smelling fish at night. They were early in the morning. It was getting noisy, and they were having that fish smell towards a certain point of the day. And everyone still loved it. They loved being over there. And then I had clients who lived there for some time because more and more things were happening. They were like, we're going to stay here. Yes, it's poorly developed. Yes, it's a mess. But, what are your thoughts about sort of that early development? Because some of that is still there. Are those people still there? New management still owns those properties over there. And how are they faring?
Well, I do want to say about new management, but I do want to say something about Oprah and the synergy there. Which
Okay.
there are still many residential property owners and managers that are doing well, managing those properties, helping their small businesses grow on the retail. We've got one new management building over here where one of their longtime residents is a flower wholesaler, and now she's going to build out for retail. So we were able to get her a city grant, and now she's going to build out for retail. So we're so thankful for companies like New Management that have kept quality housing and quality retail spaces. And a lot of those, like you said, residential mixed use building owners and managers are still here. But let us truly say, and I say this from all my heart and as urban planning as possible, factual, there should be a statue on Randolph Street to thank Oprah Winfrey for being an economic development anchor in our community. I say after 36 years of urban planning in Chicago and I've talked to some neighborhoods all around, that if you're going to start with economic development, start from scratch. Yes, you need residents, but the first thing you need is a diner that's going to serve breakfast and lunch. And that synergy between Oprah's customers, every time she had a show, hundreds of people coming from all around the city and all around the nation would go to the restaurants along Washington and along Randolph to help them survive and thrive and then spin off new restaurants. So that breakfast and lunch business, together with Oprah bringing people to the community, was invaluable to stabilizing and growing new small businesses. And Oprah got involved personally to fix the Randolph Street planters, working with our association. She was a longtime member. When the planters were originally built on Randolph Street, they were dangerous. There were no stop signs at intersections. You had these big concrete turrets. And so Oprah, ourselves, Walter Jacobson, and Fox, we said to the city, look, you got to take some of these concrete bunkers away. They agreed. And now we don't have the smashes on Randolph Street, the vehicle. But Oprah, with her stabilization of the West Loop and the ability to sustain that synergy with La Sardine restaurant, with Wishbone, with Perez Mexican restaurant, some of the other restaurants, there's no question there should be a statue of Oprah Winfrey and Father McDermott for the West Loop, because they were able to provide those wonderful restaurants that the residents wanted on the weekends, but the Oprah customers wanted during the week. And then, like I say, more businesses came in, more restaurants and so forth. So I really appreciate you referencing Oprah. I'm so grateful to her. I think everybody in Chicago should always be grateful to her.
Again, it's one of those things where you recognize that Chicago will easily forget all of the impact that you had on not just a community, but on the entire city. Buddy Guy was just given an award by the county or the city. And the first thing he said was, why are there no statues of blues musicians who came out of Chicago? We've got Muddy Waters, it luckily has a mural, but we need more references to these people who created a genre of music that is now global. We need, more, sort of accolades for people like Oprah Winfrey, who transformed an entire community by taking a chance on, I remember what the discussion was. Someone said, you need your own studio and buy this or in the West Loop. I mean, she had to take a chance on that. Again, it's like people, and the great thing about some people are that they are innovative and they do think, beyond what they see. They can see great things happening. And I say that about you too. For you to be at the Fulton Market Association, to see this transformation over the last 30 years, I think it's amazing that you're there, you're flourishing. That area is a test case in how a community can transform itself. And I believe that the entire city can use that in some way to improve its corridors. And of course, the residents of those communities can also use that as an example of how to do things the right way. We can learn from some of the policy that was good, some of the policy that was bad, how we can then sort of elevate what you've done there to all over the city and maybe even nationally in urban corridors. So thank you, Roger, for all of your hard work.
Well, that's very nice of you, Lauren, but it wasn't just me, of course. Not only was it the businesses that were there investing, the new property owners that were there investing, but our broker community, our real estate brokers. Lauren, you're part of that community. And just on the early stages, finding creative uses for those loft type spaces, those creative businesses, those pioneers, and then we all come together. But I will tell you that I agree with you as we close that the lessons of Fulton Market can be shared with every other community in the nation. You have to have dedicated nonprofits and business owners like Oprah Winfrey and the restaurants and the food companies. You have to have dedicated government officials. And then you have to have superior public transit. And so if you could put those three pieces together with the public transit, dedicated people, and also some other factors, Fulton Market's close to the downtown, you could put those together and every community can find its way, but you have to have some essential components. But happy to continue to share what we've done in Fulton Market. And it is my prayer that every community in Chicago and every community in the world has wonderful economic development, safe streets, and community involvement. And, thank you for having the show, and hopefully some people will learn a few things.
Well, Roger, if someone wanted to talk to you about what you've done and maybe have you come and speak about sort of the West Loop's transformation, how would they reach out to you?
Lauren, thanks for the question. They can reach us through our website. Our Fulton Market Association website is fultonmarketchicago.org, fultonmarketchicago.org. And I really want folks to go there. We should have said this at the beginning, but I'll say this at the end. On our website, we also have Chicago safety solutions for pedestrians, vehicles, buildings, businesses. We want everyone to be 100% safe. Every year, our association says we should have zero crime in our neighborhood and in our city. So go to our website, fultonmarketchicago.org. People are welcome to contact me. Happy to share more.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all of our listeners and viewers of the Real Estate for the Culture podcast on the Transforming Urban Network of Podcasts. I'm Lauren Lowry with FP Commercial Real Estate. Check me out at fpcommercialadvisors.com anytime. Thanks. Have a great rest of the evening.
Bye-bye, Lauren.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening and sharing the Real Estate for the Culture podcast. Check out fpcommercial.net for all of our channels. See you next time.